panel. So I would like to introduce this concluding panel on learning from lived experience, patient perspectives, how they enrich scientific discovery. And we're very pleased to have with us Carlos Larrauri, who's on the board of directors of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and who is also the co-chair of the AMP Schizophrenia Steering Committee. And I've been delighted to work closely with him. Brandon Staglin is the president of One Mind. And he is also a member of the AMP Schizophrenia Steering Committee, and we've been delighted to work with him. And we have also Jeanti, Profaca, who is a member of the Youth Research Council of Orygen. And all three of these individuals are going to present and have a panel discussion among themselves prior to question and answer about lived experiences and their perspectives. So I'll turn it over to the three of you. Thank you so very much for this session.
Sounds excellent. Thank you, Linda. And thank you for everyone to be here. I have to say that presentation by Sydney was fascinating. I think you did a lot of the lifting for us, really, in kind of a high-level discussion of how to engage communities. And I have to say, it's been a pleasure working with Linda. I like to think of AMP Schizophrenia as this giant football team of really scientific, nerdy people. And Linda is the quarterback, and I'm really just a glorified cheerleader. But I like to think that, lived experience, we contribute in some ways also. So that's what our conversation will be about today, how we'll get granular in what we do with AMP Schizophrenia. But first, so we're going to have like two segments to our panel discussion. The first 10 minutes or so, we're just going to share our individual stories. And then the second 10 minutes, we have a couple questions that we prepared to ask each other, and we thought that this would be kind of a more fun way of having of generating insights and drawing from our experience and our expertise by experience. So, and then we'll open it again at the end to some questions. So I'd like to, without further ado, Brandon, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Carlos, and thank you, Linda, and the whole AMP team for hosting this whole event today and for enabling us to speak with you. It's an honor. So I'll start with my story. My experience with schizophrenia has overall, although it's been very scary and debilitating for a long time, ultimately been a learning experience for me and ultimately been an asset and a source of strength. So I was diagnosed with schizophrenia in 1990 when I was 18 years old, just after my freshman year in college. And it had been a tumultuous year full of challenges socially and academically, as reflected much of my adolescence. And the psychotic break that I had started off the most scary and dark and nearly the last experience of my life. So the months that followed, I was dogged moment to moment every day by terrifying delusions. I was convinced that if I made the slightest moral mistake at any moment, demons would pounce on me from behind some corner or tree and drag me off to hell for all eternity. And this is obviously a very terrifying thing to be thinking for every moment of every day. And so the worry about that and the hypervigilance that brought me to led me ultimately to exhaustion and despair. And I was seriously considering ending my life at that point. During that time, I had been trying different medications with my psychiatrist's help to try and find something that would stabilize me and help me get back on the path to wellness so I could go back to college and go on with my career. But the different medications I was trying weren't working well enough, and they had terrible side effects. So this feeds into what the AMP is doing very appropriately. So ultimately, I was able to recover and get out through that dark phase when I learned some new values and the medication began to work as well. So the values that I learned from my experiences in those dark moments were curiosity for science and faith in science to open doors for a better life for people. And the other value was love. Love my family to support me through those really dark times was incredibly powerful in teaching me the value of love in life. So the science part, I've been the beneficiary of new medications and new treatments that have been turning points in my recovery. For example, in 1990, I was an early user of clozapine for schizophrenia. In 1996, during my second episode, I was a participant in a clinical trial for cognitive training, which is a neuroplasticity-based intervention for schizophrenia, and that was a turning point as well. And then a few years later, I tried for the first time aripiprazole with my psychiatrist's help, and that was another turning point and helped me return to have the ability to feel again, emote again, and enjoy time with people again. So I had so many great supports in my recovery from schizophrenia. Today, I'm really grateful that I have the opportunity to work with the AMP and other agencies and to lead One Mind for the benefit of people experiencing serious mental illness. It's the greatest honor of my life to help in this vein. And I want to thank all of you at the AMP for the work that you do. People like you are enabling people like me and others to have hope for a better life. Thank you.
Brandon, thank you for sharing your story. It takes a lot of courage. One of the things that resonated with me is the curiosity for science, like yourself. The first thing I did with my diagnosis, I'll just share briefly before turning on to Jeanti, was order every book off Amazon that I could on mental health. And a quick anecdote, the first scientific research paper I wrote in 7th grade was on schizophrenia, and I sent it off to a clinician I know at Harvard, Joe Gonzalez Heydrich, who said, "This is great, you got the enlarged ventricles, you got the chlorpromazine." And now years later, we have the opportunity to serve on AMP schizophrenia, and it almost makes you think, like, what are the odds of that? It's almost serendipity. But I think for us, what we do with this engagement with science is we get meaning and purpose from our experiences, and that helps us to make sense of what's otherwise a very challenging situation. So anyway, I want to turn to my next esteemed expert by experience, Jeanti. Oh, you're on. Yep.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the ability to talk to you all today. So my mental health journey started when I was 17, when I was in my second last year of high school. And it was quite instantaneous, I might say. I was just eating my lunch with my friends, as I did every day. And then all of a sudden, I was just, I would say, struck down with anxiety. And from there, over the next few years, my illness really evolved. From the depression, it morphed into anxiety, and then from the anxiety, it morphed into mania, and then from the mania, it morphed into psychosis. But as my journey went on, it kind of always felt as though my illness was one step ahead. We would try treatments, try different things, and the illness would just evolve and give new challenges as things progressed. So eventually, I was diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. That's been the running diagnosis for a few years now, but before then I had 7 different diagnoses. So really, people just didn't quite know what to do with me. So as for the the psychosis itself, in my experience, most of what I was experiencing was thought insertion, which was just terrifying, to be honest, when you can no longer trust your own thoughts. Bizarre thoughts, even little things like I used to hear my neurons buzzing, which was interesting and concerning and not very conducive to just being able to live normal life. And I had really strong negative symptoms as well. But I think what is kind of the hallmark point in my story is I had this really bad psychotic episode where I was convinced that the devil was inhabiting my leg. And so I actually went out and self-amputated my leg with my dad's power saw. And that was, my psychosis had been taken seriously up until then, but the treatments were not proactive enough. And I think that episode was quite a turning point for me. I was really, really lucky that I had help from the get-go. So from that initial experience of anxiety, I was within weeks to months already seeing a psychologist, already getting help. But like I said, it was just evolving just that bit too fast. And so what really got me over the line in the end was a real holistic approach to recovery, looking at things like diet, exercise. The medication that was foundational for me for my recovery was clozapine, but while that returned me to kind of a stable baseline, I wasn't able to thrive. And it was everything coming together that really helped to get my life back on track. Yeah, thank you.
Jeanti, thank you again for sharing. Your courage is inspirational. And, when I sit with your experience, as much as I embrace humor as healthy, it's one of the NAMI principles of support, I recognize that these experiences are immensely challenging, and that's an understatement, and they deserve a certain gravitas of seriousness when we discuss them, as well as, levity to help cope. But, your experience, again, thank you for your courage. So I'm going to share mine just very briefly. Everyone's heard mine already. It's probably an old song and dance. I cracked the joke about my mother being an overbearing Cuban mother and this and that. But so I was always a good student. I love school. I love learning. I love being curious. And despite kind of like branding a tumultuous high school with highs and lows, I still did well. I still graduated in a National Hispanic Scholar with an early admissions placement program into a medical school at Ohio State, where I was guaranteed to become a physician and satisfy my Hispanic father's dreams for his first son. But as often the case, the onset of mental health illnesses surfaced in college, and it probably happened even earlier than that in high school with some of the prodromal symptoms of marijuana use and depression. But by college, some of the more serious clinical illnesses, features of the illness surfaced, including I think what was clinical depression and what later, when left untreated, became explored psychosis. I began becoming obsessed with religious texts, and I began hearing hallucinations, commenting what's up, what's going on. I started to think about the Messiah a lot, and then at times I thought even I was a Messiah, or I was a prophet or an angel. But by all measures, my life was objectively deteriorating. By my end of senior year of college, I was eating out of trash can at some point and smoking cigarettes off the ground and just wandering the campus at odd hours. So but fortunately for me, I had a family friend who called my mom. My mom came to campus and she met, and I told my advisor at this time, when she said we don't have to discuss anything that happened on campus, I said I have a Cuban mother. I've never had the right to privacy. So that's where there's a little levity and a little insight, because it did allow for a conversation to start occurring about my mental health challenges at college. And from there, we got home, and my mom was really my advocate, and we saw a dozen mental health professionals. And like you, Jeanti, I got a variety of diagnosis at first: schizotypal or avoidant personality disorder and different things like that. But ultimately, when we saw the dream team at the University of Miami and the team of interdisciplinary professionals, I was diagnosed with adult onset schizophrenia. There's a couple things I credit to my recovery at a high level. From a policy perspective, I think of community based care. I think of early intervention. I think of access to care. But a big part of it, in the context of what we're talking about, has been medications. It was when I started taking medications 3 months later that I had a light bulb gone off, and I said, this is an illness that I can manage if I treat it seriously and I take care of myself. Up until that point, I had anosognosia, or had a lack of self-awareness or insight. And I'm very glad that I'm not just, as Jeanti said, surviving isn't enough, but I have the opportunity, I think, to thrive and contribute and be at the vanguard of the scientific pursuit. But I can't help but wonder sometimes what my life would have been like if there was an intervention during the clinical high risk period or the prodrome. So I want to ask Jeanti, I thought it'd be interesting to speculate here. How do you think your life would be different if you had an intervention during the CHR state or prodrome?
I want to preface this by saying it's not all bad, and my illness has made me the person that I am today. And so for that, I am thankful, but things would be so different if I had that intervention much earlier. I mean, for one, I would probably have 2 legs still. My early 20s would probably have been going out with friends, doing that kind of stuff, not having all my friends coming to visit me while I was on the psych ward. I've always been very academically driven. So a goal for a long time for me has been medicine. And with that, if I hadn't suffered the way that I had, I could be in med school right now. My GPA could be saved. It would just be entirely different. And I think, of course it would be better. While there were so many good things that came out of my experience, if I had had that early intervention, would have been life changing. So talking about that kind of intervention, I'd like to throw it to Brandon and just ask, so what is the role of medicines and psychosocial interventions?
Yeah, thank you, Jeanti, and thank you for sharing your experience. It's incredibly moving to hear what you've been through, and I really admire your resilience ultimately and thriving as you do today, despite all the challenges that you faced. So thank you for sharing your story. And what you said resonates with me around how life could have been different, with early intervention. But speaking of the interventions that I have had over the years, medication, as you said, Carlos, and as well so emphatically, has been a really important part of my well-being. For many years, I didn't want to take medication. I didn't want to admit that I had an illness that required medication to be the person or act as the person I wanted to act as. But a turning point came for me when my psychiatrist asked me, "What would it mean to you to take medication?" This was after my second episode. And I thought, well, okay, wait a minute. I believe in science. I believe that the brain and the mind are two sides of the same coin. And by influencing the brain, I can influence how I feel and how I act and how I behave and how I experience life. So I acquiesced then to try treatment, and that helped a lot, medical treatment, that is, and it helped a lot to me to stabilize. And even today, I take my medication cocktail religiously, so to speak, and adjust it occasionally, but I find it does make a difference every time I adhere to the prescription that my psychiatrist has prescribed. It benefits me greatly. But other treatments have been, and other approaches have been really beneficial too. So for example, Carlos talked about a sense of purpose. And this is something that gets me up every morning, that keeps me driving forward through life. The sense of purpose that I can make a difference in the world based on the experiences that I've had through the work that I do for mental health. That gives me a lot of satisfaction. Hearing from folks who are dealing with mental health challenges, who know of the work that I do, the work that the AMP does, for example, is really gratifying to hear that it inspires them too. And I learn from them at the same time, learn from their experiences. So that's gratifying as well. That sense of purpose comes from not only the work, but the ability to hear and feel that sense of purpose comes from taking care of my mental health in other ways, like getting enough sleep. It makes a big difference. It's like night and day, whether I sleep or not, whether I get enough sleep or not. Exercise, of course, meditation, spending quality time with family and friends, knowing that I am loved, and participating in the love of my family and friends, giving love to others, expressing that gives me a lot of meaning. And that helps me a lot as well with my well-being. So it's a combination of so many things, the medication-based approach, as well as the lifestyle approach and non-pharmaceutical treatments like the cognitive training that I mentioned, meditation as well. So many things help. So there's no silver bullet for well-being, but if you bring a lot to bear, you get out of it what you put into it. So Carlos, I wanted to ask you, you've shared your lived experience, and it's been great to hear your story. And as always, I always like to joke about your mom, no matter how many times I hear it. It's funny, and it resonates. But I wanted to ask you, how does your lived experience inform your interest in science and research? And what is your lived experience? What value does that bring for the AMP schizophrenia?
It's a great question, Brandon. And I'm going to skirt it for a moment just so I can comment on a few things that you and Jeanti said. I do want to emphasize what Jeanti said. It's not all bad. There is a tendency sometimes when we think about people with disabilities to think of their lived experiences as worse than they would qualify it themselves. And in fact, people are immensely resilient and have an innate capacity to recover. So like Jeanti, I'm happy with the person I have become. I don't know if I would have become it but for this lived experience. I wish there might have been an easier way, and I certainly hope that my loved ones have an easier path towards becoming the people they want to become. But it's by no measures, an unequivocal bad thing when you have the opportunity to recover. And but so much of that often comes down to issues outside of your control when you're ill, your family support, your access to care, things like that. And then Brandon was saying about a holistic approach. I think it's very, very important to understand that. I think Tom Insel has this metaphor about the house on fire, where he was at a presentation talking about neurotransmission or some mechanistic thing, and maybe it was an Omni conference, I don't know. But the audience member said, Tom, you're explaining the pain on my house while my house is on fire. Ostensibly the person's loved one was in crisis. And, to continue with that metaphor, I think that medications in many cases put the fire out. They're like the firefighters on the scene, the biomedical care from a clinician, and when you're in crisis, will put the fire out. But, the foundation and the house that's rebuilt on top of that, that fire is often, in many cases, not just medical clinical care. It's often psychosocial support and services. It's peer support. It's therapy. It's really this lifestyle you have to adopt to succeed at recovery. So I think a medication is necessary in most senses, but oftentimes insufficient. And that's where the psychosocial component comes in. These are biomedical illnesses, but they have a psychosocial component. And part of that is also is the remedy for these illnesses. And I think I can't understate that, because it's, I'm sure your experiences are similar, Jeanti and Brandon. The first couple of years, it's a full-time job living in recovery, going to therapy, going to support groups, learning how to act appropriately and talk appropriately again after being, out there because of the psychosis and this and all that. And it takes a lot of work. And for me, it took a couple of years before I got kind of to that baseline of I think a previous level of functioning, and that's kind of the time scale for these illnesses. Also, it doesn't happen in weeks or months, but a matter of years for the brain to heal again. But so let me get more to the matter at hand and answer the question about how my lived experience, and how our lived experience informs AMP schizophrenia efforts. I think Sydney did a pretty great job of discussing this at a high level, how important it is to engage, patients and family members at the highest levels at the organization, not just as not just only in outreach or dissemination, but also in formulating a hypothesis, to implementation, to evaluation. I think that we provide valuable lived experience expertise, and we can help with things like the language or health literacy on the website, for example, or cultural issues regarding outreach and dissemination. We're talking about how to reach out to marginalized communities. And we know that there's benefits to patient engagement and incorporating people with lived experience in terms of, I think, increased patient satisfaction, increased retention, things like that. Ultimately, I think it's a moral imperative, because ultimately, people with lived experience are the stakeholders with the most skin in the game. We're the ones that will be ultimately consuming final products of drug development, and we're the ones that have the most to gain and the most to lose. Certainly, I'm grateful for the medication I take, but it comes with serious, sequelae that are life-limiting of themselves. And my hope is that there are better interventions down the road. But a lot of it, one of the primary roles that we can do is reiterate what matters for patients and family members. I probably spend more time thinking about neurotransmission or cortical thinning or GABA than the average person with schizophrenia. But at the end of the day, I still think a lot more about my goals, who I want to become, the family I want to have, and how we get from medicines to what matters to people at the end of the day is really what we're talking about here. And those are often, quality of life, functioning, and things like that. As much as mechanistic, hypotheses are truly fascinating and interesting. But so, I think there's a moral imperative. I think it's a practical thing as well. And I think, one thing we have to be mindful of that I found in discussing the challenges of incorporating people with lived experience into scientific discovery is that it may very well increase time and costs, and there's still emerging fields, so there's still evolving best practices. We have to avoid tokenism and checking off a box and engage substantively. Sometimes there is information asymmetry, and we may not have the technical expertise of the experts. So, it's important to communicate in manners that are clear, and expect realistic participation and expectation, and incentivize people with lived experience appropriately and compensate them for their expertise by experience, but or other means. But again, in the context of AMP schizophrenia, we've done, I think, great work with outreach. Brandon and I have done the podcast. We produced papers and served on panels, getting the word out. We tinkered with the health literacy on the website. And, for me, and I think for us, I think I can speak for us, is there's a personal and there's a professional component to this work. There's the personal that imbues a lot of meaning and purpose, but there's also this is also a very rich professional development experience for us as burgeoning individuals in this field that is unparalleled, which for me is sufficient incentive on its own, but that can't be understated. I think this helps people with lived experience in their own recoveries, again, with that sense of meaning and purpose. And again, I think also has practical applications for the research. So I do want to save some time for questions. I want to reiterate what Brandon said by expressing my gratitude for everyone's work. I think it's humbling, and I think it's exciting all at the same time to feel that we're on the vanguard of potential discoveries that could transform people's lives. Jeanti, Brandon, I welcome you to share any last thoughts of gratitude before we open up for a brief Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Carlos. I want to share a quick story about how medication has helped me. And the AMP is about laying the groundwork to create new medications. So I'll give an example of this. So after my second episode of schizophrenia, it took me much longer to recover. And I was on a different cocktail of medications, and I'm still kind of grappling with, do I want to take these medications or not? And trying to reduce some of these meds just without checking the psychiatrist, excuse me. And I wasn't doing very well. Like my functioning was poor. I couldn't interact with people very well. I was anxious all the time. And so, but I wanted to meet more people. I wanted to find a life partner. I wanted to date again successfully. It's something I haven't been able to do in so many years. And then I met this woman. Her name's Nancy at a party, and I liked her, and we began to develop interest in each other. And I wanted that to work out. And so that motivated me to try actually taking the medication that I was prescribed in the way it was prescribed. And so when I did that morning, the hike that we went on together, the quote unquote date that we had was wonderful. I mean, we really hit it off, and contrary to the experiences I had with people before that, was just so rewarding. And we've been married now for 13 years. It gets better every year. So that I want to use that story to help underscore my gratitude to scientists like you who have developed new medications for people who struggle with conditions like schizophrenia. Thank you.
Jeanti?
Yeah, I just want to jump in and add my thanks. Being a young person, it's so exciting to see the future and see that people might not have to go through what I've been through. And also thinking like you guys are laying the groundwork for what my kids might be struggling with. Genetically, that's a possibility. And the thought that there are people already working to rectify that is so, so exciting. And yeah, just thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story and just do it in such gratitude for the work that you guys are doing.
Well, thank you so much, Carlos, Brandon, and Jeanti. And I don't know if you've had a chance to look at the chat. There's so many incredibly appreciative comments for everything that you've shared with all of us, and what a wonderful session it has been, and the comments just keep coming on and on. So it was really gripping. It's heart-wrenching. It's so personal. It's so inspiring to those of us who haven't had those kinds of struggles. And it's just been an honor to work with you and Brandon. It's just really been wonderful for me to come from the basic science perspective and to see so much that can be done together in this collaboration. So opening it up for any questions from anyone or any comments that anyone would like to make. Just thank you so much.
You're welcome. It's been an honor to speak and share my experiences. I'm sure I speak for Carlos and Jeanti too in that regard. But Carrie Bearden posted a question. Carrie, would you like to voice that question?
Sure. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to thank you again for, this panel was just wonderful, and so appreciate hearing this. But yeah, just quickly, my question is just are there things that you hear or see in the literature or hear researchers say, at a conference that you feel are either really wrong-headed or else hurtful. I think about some of the terminology, and I wonder how that strikes you as someone that's experiencing this.
If anyone wants to step in, just jump in. But I'd have to say, amongst this group, I haven't, as much as our kind of a role as lived experience sometimes is to be a watchdog and hold people's feet to the fire to make sure as advocates things are being done correctly. Everything regarding ethics and patient burden has been done very thoughtfully. And amongst this group, I have no complaints. And my greatest issue at the end of the day is being judged upon something that people, a label, schizophrenia, when they don't see the whole person. And that discrimination is very real, and we're still going to face that throughout our careers and our lives. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's been a movement to actually change the name of schizophrenia to something else. There's been papers published by Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and their Consumer Advisory Board, another paper which I co-wrote with Dr. Sofia Vinogradov and Jennifer Zick at University of Minnesota, called Eliminate Schizophrenia, on the same topic, because many people with schizophrenia apparently feel that the name itself is stigmatizing, and I get that. It's so fraught with so much emotional baggage and cultural baggage over the years. So that's an interesting question. Is that terminology itself something that should be rectified? But that's a whole can of worms to open. I mean, how do you do it if you want to change the name? And what would be the ultimate goal? And what would you change it to? So yeah, that's an interesting question.
I will underscore one point Brandon made earlier about how important it is to contextualize, even taking medication in the context of what people want in life. For him, it was love. It was the motivation to find a partner for love. And like Brandon, in so much, this happens to so many people with psychosis. You're on meds for a year or two, you're doing well, and you're thinking, hey, maybe I don't need them. And you get off them. Same thing happened to me. I tried getting off my meds after 2 years. I lost a lot of weight. I was feeling great, but suddenly my life's deteriorating again. And for me, it was the motivation of continuing my education. I was in graduate school and I was struggling with my master's to become a clinician. And my friend Joe was like, Carlos, you're embarking on the path to become a clinician. As a psychiatrist, I can tell you it's a hard one. Why don't you try, taking the medication at a bit of a higher dose? You can achieve your academic, goals and kind of that shared decision making and contextualizing adherence with medication in terms of what really matters for the person, instead of, you're sick and you need to stop hearing voices, is so helpful. And that really worked there.
That's a great point. I love that focus on life goals and intrinsic motivation, rather than, you're sick, you need to change yourself. It's rather, what is it you want to achieve, and working as a partner, as Sydney was so eloquently saying about community engagement, partnering with an individual struggling to assist them to achieve what they want to achieve.
Yeah, well, it was certainly a very powerful session, and I just want to thank all three of you, and thank you for all the comments in the chat, and thank you for the question, Carrie, and thank you for the questions and the thoughtful way that you put the panel together. That was really lovely. So I think that the hour is really late, and all of you have been so engaged for this entire 4+ hours today, and I just want to thank everybody again for your participation in this meeting. Thank everyone for all the hard work that you've done. I want to express my congratulations to all of you. You're doing such a wonderful job, and we're so excited to see the data coming in and how we move forward together. And it's been really a team effort. It's been an awe-inspiring project. It's been the most exciting project I've ever worked on. And I'm just happy to be part of it and to be working with you, Carlos, and everyone on the team. And thank you again to Marty and Tina and Eve and Omar and Simone and Cheryl and everybody for putting this together. It's just a fabulous program. So wish you all a good rest of your day, evening, whatever it be, and can't wait to see you again on Zoom.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you all.
You all.